Welcome, everybody, to the AIOps Weekly podcast. I'm your host, Sean McDermott, and my co-host, Bill. Bill, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are yourself, Sean?
I'm doing really well. So today we are going to talk about collaborative intelligence and machines and humans. So we came across this article. I know you read it. I read it.
Mm-hmm.
It's by this. It's by this university called Harvard. I mean, I haven't heard of them before, but they write some pretty good stuff. But this is yeah, you want to look them up? I think they're up in the Northeast somewhere. So this is written out of the Harvard Business Review, and it's called "Collaborative Intelligence: Humans and AI Are Joining Forces." And it's really about, how they went and did some research on about 1,500 companies and what they're doing in AI and how AI are working together. One of the things I want to do on this podcast, because we can talk a lot about AIOps specifically, and AI for IT operations, but I think there's obviously so much going on in the world of AI. And how do we pull in things around the world of AI into making AIOps more successful? Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of synergies. And I thought this article, and I know you and I talked about this before this show, I thought this article was excellent. So if you're into AI and you're into AIOps, then I highly recommend you look at this, you read this article. It's about 14 pages. It's a read, and we're actually going to break this up into two parts. So this week we're going to kind of talk about half of it, and then the next week we'll talk about the other half. But if you do get a chance, if you're listening to this and want to read the article in more detail, I would highly suggest it, because I think it's a very cool article in regards to the future of AI, how humans are going to interact with it. It takes a lot of the scariness out of AI, like Elon Musk talking about AI as the quintessential threat to humanity. And it really puts this into more of a light of how humans and AI are going to interact together, and the synergies and the strengths and weaknesses and things like that. So if you're okay with that, we can jump right into it. Sound good?
Yeah, it sounds good. Yeah, I did also want to point out, this isn't, a lot of times we cover things that just were written, but I think this was written 3 or 4 years ago in 2018, and we dug it up, and really because we were looking at this topic of kind of organizational behavior and human behavior with AI, and came across it. So even though it's a little dated, it's not dated at all. It's exactly hits the mark.
Yeah, I think this is holding up very well with the test of time. And even some of the things that they're talking about in here about the examples. So they're coming at this from a more generalized AI. So some of the examples are more generalized when they talk about Siri and Alexa and things like that, which aren't as interesting for us in the IT operations space. But and they talk about things like human jobs. They start off talking about diagnosing disease, translating languages, content development. I actually added this into like content development, because we are starting to use AI technologies in our marketing programs, right? Where because as a content-driven organization where we're trying to get out thought leadership and things like that, we find that getting out content on a regular basis that is interesting content requires a lot of effort. So there's tools out there, and right now we're using this thing called Jarvis AI to help us in taking our content we write and making it richer, through examples and things like that. So you're seeing that all the time. And I actually use Grammarly all the time. In fact, I had the plugin. It runs in the background on my entire Mac computer and pretty much does AI-based grammar checking on everything I write. And it's incredibly helpful and incredibly humbling to realize how bad of a writer I actually am. So, but I think with the article to me focuses on this idea of complementing, not replacing, right? And they researched 1,500 companies. And one of the things they brought up, which I thought was just really an excellent kind of concept, is this idea that through collaborative intelligence, humans and AIs actively enhance each other's complementary strengths. Humans provide leadership, teamwork, creativity, social skills, and the AI provides speed, scalability, and quantitative capabilities. Which is really key because we talk about this in the AIOps space with the amount of data coming in. Humans are really visual people, right? And we're not really good at processing, gigabytes of data, right? That's why we use spreadsheets. That's why BI tools and analytical tools, so we can take mass amounts of data and bring it down into data sets that we can then look at. And that's where the AI can really play the role in scaling and quantifying that data so that we as humans can look at it and then figure out, okay, that's telling me something interesting, but it's not telling me the whole story. Let's go get some more data and bring that in and bring it down into a smaller subset and analyze it and start looking at. We're really good at looking at small subsets of summarized data in different perspectives, right?
Right.
So, all right. So then we kind of they talked about this idea of humans assisting machines, right? And in this, they break it down into 3 parts. One is training, explaining, and sustaining. So with this, I think we should jump right into it. And why don't you kind of give me your take on the training aspect?
Yeah. So a couple of the examples here is, that machine learning, if you don't give it data and you don't give it in a lot of cases, this is a supervised learning kind of aspect of machine learning, is that if you're not giving it the data, but then you're also not coaching it with saying, that's right, that's good. It's like training somebody to kick field goals. You have to say, well, that didn't go through the field goal or went through the field goal. And you sort of you feed back the outcomes and the accuracy of those outcomes. And then the learning happens. And so the training really happens on both sides, making sure you're getting relevant data. You can't train machine to recognize dogs and then send it a bunch of flowers and plants and trees. You got to get pictures of dogs and pictures of other animals. So it's the same thing with AIOps. If you're feeding it type real world problems and logs and alerts and performance metrics, that's the right data. And then the feedback loop, and we've seen this with a couple managers event management tools, is the feedback loop is the operators are actually saying, yes, this was a good job of correlating. This was a good job of clustering. This was a good job of detecting what the root cause was versus the symptomatic alerts, or this was a good job of detecting a dynamic thresholding. And so, just another example of thresholding back to AIOps is just there's so many different algorithms that can be used to detect outliers or detect, standard deviation or different moving windows and whatnot, that you really have to know which of these are going to make sense for the particular data set that you have. And a lot of that just requires the robots aren't living in the real world. They don't bring sort of that insight as to what is real versus what is not real, what had an impact on things that are outside the scope of the system that you're using, that requires the humans to kind of see that. And so that training really takes place in both sides. And the examples they use is, Microsoft's AI assistant Cortana, and, extensive training on kind of teaching it how to be confident, caring, helpfully, but not bossy. And I think it used the example of Apple's Siri just to be a little bit of sassy, because that's sort of the personality of Apple. And so that kind of training, is critical. And that's something that you're really going to need humans to continue to kind of do that ongoing training.
Yeah, I that's what I when I read these articles, I try to take it into context. Okay, how can this be applied to AI ops? And I think you're dead right on that. And there's so much data. And the thing is that if you can use the data, and when we've done machine learning before, when we're working on our machine learning models, we're consuming data. And then the data comes back with different recommendations, and then we basically say that works, that doesn't work, right? And that helps in the training of it. Yep. So the value proposition here is that you've got lots of data coming in. The data, the AI, the machine learning and the AI can basically process all that and come back with recommended resolution routines, right? As a human, where the human interaction comes in is okay. Of those 5, I'm going to take choice number 2, right? And that AI is going to learn that and say, okay, he took choice number 2. So when they see something very similar to that, they may rank choice number 2, now choice number 1, and you start refining that. And if choice number 5 never gets picked, then eventually choice number 5 just stops being presented, right? So that's a really good, So thank you for that. On the explaining side, so the second part to talk about is explaining.
Yeah.
And to me, this is really this is kind of interesting because what AI can actually do is come back with some suggestions that may not look logical, right, to how we thought things should happen, right? And the example, as I read this part of the article, the thing I started thinking about, completely IT unrelated, is Google creating an AI engine to play Go, right? And Go is considered the most complex game in the world, even beyond chess. And if you haven't seen a documentary, I think we talked about this months and months ago at the beginning of the podcast. How many, like 100 episodes ago? If you haven't seen the documentary, I highly, if you're into AI, you should go watch it because it's super cool. But at the end, the AI makes a move which literally completely stuns everybody. And these are like the top 5 Go players in the world, masters, grandmasters, whatever they're called. And the crowd is aghast, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, it made a mistake," right? And it was literally just kind of a crazy moment. Even the developers of the models were like in shock, like, "Why did it make that move?" And everyone's like, "Oh, this is the point in which AI leashed its, made its potential and made a huge mistake." What really happened, though, is that it actually made a very perceived illogical decision on a move, but it turned out it won the game because it was thinking so far down the road that move became more and more logical as time went on, right?
Yeah.
So that's really what they talk about here, is this idea of explaining. So expect that your models are going to produce results that may not look logical in the context of how you do things today, but you should pay attention to it, and you're going to need people who are going to need to who explain it, right, and explain why the model did a certain thing.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
No, well, I was just going to say that explaining also fits back to explaining back to the machine, right? And so sometimes the things do something very logical, and the example is almost like an urban legend now that the target sending pregnancy things to a house that was the daughter was pregnant because it knew that she was pregnant, and that's how the parents found out, right? A teenager. And so I think there's creeping. The thing that's changed since 2018 is creepiness, right? The fact that it's watching you, and it's kind of like, well, that's creepy, or you know what not to do. And so I think what the machines are going to do is come up with an extremely logical answer, right? Or what you should do. And I think that explaining is explaining to the public or explaining to the business, or whatever that means with using expertise, but it's also providing that explaining back to, okay, these outcomes or these results probably aren't going to fit. They're a little too creepy, or they're not good. They're not fitting within our human world.
Yeah, I think in the personal world, right, or in the general metaverse, that's probably a complete misusage of the term metaverse. But in the general world, there's a creepiness factor. But when I think about this in the context of IT, I can see things like recommendations coming back to do something related to a machine, and the operator going, "That doesn't make any sense to me. I wouldn't do that." But someone has to kind of go into the data and look at it, and they try to explain it. And they may say, well, the reason why it's recommending to do this is because it's detecting a problem 3 systems over that is perpetuating a latency that then is affecting this other device, which then is affecting your device, right? Mm-hmm. Because humans, like, one thing we do is, like, we like to look for the obvious, right? Yeah. We are essentially lazy beings, right? And this is why we create technology, because we don't like doing hard things. So we try to build technologies. We don't like digging ditches, so we create, a ditch digger machine, right? We don't like, nailing nails into a roof, so we create a nail gun, right? So we as humans, because we're lazy, create all these efficiencies. Yet we do have this these blind spots where we tend to see things that we want to see. And AI is machine learning is going to come back and tell you other things. So the last thing I want to talk about this area, right, is sustaining. So I'll let you cover that.
Yeah, and actually, I kind of jumped the gun a little bit. My example with target or the creepiness actually applies probably more to the sustaining, right? So explaining is taking the outcomes and explaining it to the humans, explaining it to the, what makes sense. And you really need experts that can interpret the outcomes and the results, right? The Go example is the why did it choose that? That required some humans to kind of put that in some layman's terms as to why that was, or at least terms to the Go experts. But sustaining is about what I explained, which is you got to keep refining and putting good outcomes and putting good results and putting barriers and constraints on the outcomes of your algorithms or whatever the learning is or whatever the recommendation is. An example of just privacy, the AI is going to be able to provide things and provide information, but there's barriers around privacy. There's the barriers around revealing personal details about what's a good user experience, what versus what maybe is going a little too far. And so that sustaining requires really the operations of the AI, and maybe even back to the training. You're sort of do the training up front, explaining, and then kind of bringing a full cycle is sort of the retraining, which happens over time in the sustainment and really the operationalization of it and the continuous improvement of the algorithms. And that's going to create, there's roles for humans to assist the machines in that way as well.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the examples they talk about, I mean, this is the far example here is, machines that basically come to life and, kill people. I don't think we necessarily have to worry about that in the IT world, but there is, in the IT world, we do manage and maintain a tremendous amount of private information, right? And how do we sustain these systems to operate within the ethics of what we believe need to be done? So cool. So we'll wrap up that section, and that's humans assisting machines. And now let's talk about machines assisting humans, and then we'll kind of end this part and then pick it up next week. But so again, this has three areas I love because I'm a man of threes. I love the rule of three: amplifying, interacting, embodying. So I'll kick this one off with amplifying. So the amplifying is basically how machines can create a wider range of opportunities. And what they talk about in the paper is this example of you're a designer, you want to design a chair. And so you basically feed into the AI application all the specifications you want, like how big you want it, what you want it made out of, how many pounds that you want it to support. And it will come back with, 50 to 100 designs. And then you can iterate that, and you can kind of look at all those designs and say, oh, okay, this is pretty cool. That's pretty cool. I like that aspect. And then you can refine it, and then they'll refine it down to like 50. So what's interesting is that over the past 30 years of starting companies and other things, I've created a lot of logos, right? And this is literally the process I go through when I hire like 99 designs to do a logo. I put in some specifications, and then I get designers from all over the world who basically submit the designs, and then I start looking at them. Some things I like, sometimes I don't. Some I like elements of, some I like elements of that, and I start trying to piece them together and steering these designers to the point where I get like 3 or 4 designers that I can work with that are now all kind of, starting to assemble similar logos that I can eventually select. And I've had a lot of luck that way, and I think that's what talking about here with AI. And how this applies I could see this applying into the IT world is key metrics, business metrics. We all like to measure stuff, right? The reality is that we can measure everything. What the real question is what should you be measuring, and how can you measure the fewest number of things in your IT environment to give you the greatest amount of impact and decision-making, criteria. So I could see this and we do this all the time manually, right? You create it. One of the things I tell all my customers all the time is for every report we create, it creates 5 more questions, right? Mm-hmm. And that's okay, because what it is, it's a refining process, because they'll say, I want to report on this. So you create the report and you look at it and you go, okay, this is pretty good. The data's okay, but it's not exactly what I was thinking about. Can you do this, which is a subset of the data, maybe spun a little different way? And I see
Yeah.
that as really AI and AI ops supporting that in understanding, okay, we can now collect all this data and it presents to management. These are, 50 metrics that we can measure. Now, I don't want to be looking at 50 metrics, right? I want to be looking at 3 or 4 or 5, but that's about it. So then looking at that and feeding back, okay, I like that metric, but I like it spun this way. I like that metric. And then it starts aggregating these things. And eventually you get to the point where AI is basically presenting you, hey, these are the 4 or 5 key metrics that you need to manage that will cover your entire business, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think AI ops is going to play a big role in that.
Yeah, I was thinking as you were describing, it was making me think, that the creative process, and which is what this Amplify is also doing. It's a journey, right? It's about taking a step and seeing possibilities, and taking another step, seeing possibilities, and then you start to expand and then refine. And I think almost like psychedelic drugs, it's like the these
I
it's
don't know how to
helping
I don't know how to
open up.
respond to that
You don't know how to
comment, but
respond. Well, you were describing it sort of, it's heightening creativity. It is taking restrictions off of the mind and letting AI sort of amplify and see what different possibilities are to help you sort of come up with a solution you may not have seen, an elegant, simplistic solution. So I did read a book not long ago. I won't bring it up now, but that talks a lot about that. But the second thing,
about machine learning or
it's about
microdosing.
well, it's about Michael Pollan, and How to Change Your Mind is the book. So
Okay.
he's written a lot of different books out there, so worth checking out. But the second thing was interaction, and talks a lot about AI agents like Cortana can facilitate, just better communication between people. And I think we're getting close to this scenario, whereas normally you call, your insurance agent, you call AT&T or your cable company, whatever, and you're going through the IVR, and they're asking you to explain your problem, and then you just start yelling into the phone, agents, like, I want to talk to a human. I I think we're not that far off from, you're actually talking to a human and you're yelling at the human, AI, because the human's not understanding your problem, but the AI probably will understand your problem because they're seeing things in so many different ways. And so I think that how machines assist humans is a much more, I guess, if data is really your problem and coming up with something you really need, in a lot of ways, the whole world of AI and all the data it has exposed to is going to come up with the right answer to your problem, or helping you solve the problem, or helping you get to the information that you need in a much more efficient way. And I've just noticed in the last few years, when I do come across one of these companies and their AI assisted technology, it's amazing what they can do for you now, and how fast and efficient it is, versus if I talk to a human being, it's, you gotta do the small talk and then get into all kinds of paths to get there, and it's very dependent on how good that human is at their job.
Yeah, I think that I'm using Siri more and more every day, right? And getting less self-conscious about yelling out commands. But I see this this interacting really one. Chatbots are in the IT world. Chatbots are here, right? And virtual chatbots, AI driven chatbots, they're here, right? So that's already kind of entered into things. So again, that I believe that's part of the AIOps story, right? Because when we talk about chatbots supporting operations and end user support, that's operations. Therefore, AI is introducing into that world. But I also see this in the context of problem management, and if we see a problem, and let's say there's a particular device that has a issue, and that issue could be resolved as, okay, if you upgrade to the latest version of the OS on that device, that will mitigate that bug on there. And I think this is a huge actually use case.
Yeah.
So now you want to be able to go out and say, okay, show me all the
Yeah.
devices in our infrastructure, especially let's say you're a ginormous bank, global bank. I mean, you could have 100,000 of these devices out there. Show me all the devices out there that have this OS level that need to be upgraded, right?
And it should just bring it up.
And it just brings it up.
Voice, right?
Yeah, it just brings it up. So it actually basically, the alarm, the situation is created and basically says, this is the issue with this device. And this is the recommended remediation. And oh, by the way, there's 13,000 other devices that we believe have the same problem, just haven't been affected yet, right?
Okay.
I think this is huge. I mean, look at the Log4j, right, issue. And with that vulnerability and the vast amount of infrastructure out there that uses Log4j, the ability for, and I mean, I would love, like, as if I were a CIO, to basically ask my console, how many, where is Log4j deployed in our infrastructure? How many instances do I have? And where are they located geographically? And it to pop back and say, you have 4,000 versions of Log4j that have been identified as potential threat that need to be upgraded and need to be patched, and 75% of them reside under this business unit of investment banking, right? I mean, that would be awesome, right? Because right now, companies are scrambling to figure out what that is, right? And to answer that question, they could spend man months trying to figure that out. I mean, they're talking about Log4j being a problem years from now. To how. So, all right, I'll get off my soapbox on that one. All right.
Yeah, but that is, I think it's got to be coming. I mean, you don't work today within your IT ops tools through your voice, and I think that's certainly coming. I haven't seen it too much in any of the tools that we review, but that has to be coming. The other interesting aspect of that, and I know we got to move to the last one, was work from home. You walk into a huge network operations center, and you can't. Not everybody can be talking to the machine, right? You work from home, that voice, it's no big deal. You can be talking to your machine at home. No one else is listening. And I think that interaction you're going to see much more. It allows you to get up and actually troubleshoot things walking around and talking to your computer. So it's coming.
Yeah. The last thing, and then we'll kind of wrap up for today, is the last section, or last part of this, machines helping humans, is embodying. And really what they talk about here is this concept of robots. And I mean, the examples they use about robots and being safe around humans, and, robots evolving from potentially dangerous and dumb industrial machines to smart, context-aware cobots. I don't know if this is translatable right now into the IT world. I mean, I don't really see us doing a lot of robots right now in IT. I mean, could you see robots entering into data centers and things like that, where, if you need to go in and swap things out, the robot could actually kind of move down the path and make a change and things like that. I could see that coming. I don't really see that today. This is very Avatar-ish to me, this kind of concept, or Terminator, where the guys sit inside of giant exoskeletons that have machine guns and stuff like that. So kind of a cobot there. But
the one area I did see, near the end, they talk about wearable robotic devices, and I think we're in the metaverse using it, I think, correctly in Facebook, and what they're creating is just virtual worlds, and I think that's through wearable devices, headsets, different ways to see things which go beyond just this, this rectangular screen you look at, and turning IT operations into something three-dimensional with better ways to visualize that information request you were just asking for. Show me all the Log4j, to be able to see that in a virtual world, in a three-dimensional world with headsets and whatnot. I can see those wearables becoming part of that, embodying kind of the role of an operator. We're pretty far out.
That's an interesting. I don't think we're that far out. That's a kind of interesting concept, because remember Google Glass and people wearing that, and just how ridiculous that was. But there is actually a very strong business case for technicians and things like that using Google Glass or AR, right? So that they can go to a site, look at something, it scans it, it knows what it is, knows what the part is, can actually then bring up information related to it. We're already seeing a little bit of that, like when I get in my car, right, in the morning. If I get in my car before, 8 o'clock in the morning, my Siri system pops up and says, "Do you want to go to Foxtails?" So a little plug out to Foxtails Coffee in Orlando.
There you go.
And it literally says, do you, and it'll actually pop up the map. And all I have to say is yes. And it'll actually route me to the Foxtails. A little creepy when that first happened, but then I was like, okay, that's kind of cool. So I don't think we're too far off of that, really, in the IT space. And I think it would be interesting to see what, AI-driven, wearable technology will be for IT technicians and knock operators and things like that. So
I think we'll know we've made it when you see a commercial on TV that looks a lot like Call of Duty, but it's about operating your IT. You're in the war field of all of the problems and incidents you're working with, and it's so good. There's a commercial about it.
So that's funny because having been in IT for forever, and running Windward, it's our 25th anniversary for Windward. I've seen a lot of stuff and had a lot of things pitched at me. And one guy, this is probably about 10 or 12 years ago, pitched to me a fault management system where all the alerts came in as like little dots and icons, and you would shoot them, and I was like, I don't know, never materialized. I didn't have a lot of faith in that idea, and it never materialized. So,
like the Pong of what we're talking about.
Yeah, or like the Call of Duty of network operations.
Yeah.
So awesome. Well, this has been a great discussion. I'm super excited about talking next week about part 2. In part 2, we'll be talking about how to reimagine your business around decision making and speed and scale and things like that. So I'm really excited about that topic next week. So we'll continue this on. If you're, I want to thank you for joining us today, and check out the article, read it up before our next before next week. And if you've got any questions, you can actually post them in the comments. We'd be happy to kind of address any of those comments too. So with that, I think we'll sign off. Bill, thanks a lot. It was a pleasure, and I guess we'll see each other next week.
Yep. See you next week.
All right. Take care.